There are moments in life that split your entire existence into two halves. The half before you knew what true darkness looked like, and the half after. Most people spend their whole lives in the first half. They sleep soundly. They wake up easy. They go about their days without ever catching a single glimpse of what waits just beyond the warm glow of their ordinary little world. Those people are lucky. They just do not know it yet. Because once you cross that line, once you see what I have seen and what the people in these stories have seen, you do not get to go back. The door does not close. The lights do not come back on. And sleep, real sleep, the kind where your body lets go completely and your mind drifts into somewhere peaceful, that becomes something that belongs to someone else, someone you used to be. I want you to pay very close attention to what I am about to tell you. These are not campfire stories. These are not things people made up to entertain you. These are real accounts from real people who were sitting in places exactly like the one you might be sitting in right now, feeling exactly as safe and comfortable as you probably feel at this moment. And then everything changed for them, so settle in, turn the lights down if you want, get comfortable, because by the time I am done talking, you are going to think twice about every isolated cabin, every dark stretch of forest road, and every quiet moment in the middle of the night when the house makes a sound and you tell yourself it is nothing. It all started with a card game. That is the part that haunts me the most when I think back on everything that happened that weekend. Not the knife. Not the humming. Not the wide, empty darkness of that forest in the middle of the night. It started with a simple, harmless card game. And by the time we were sitting in that locked bedroom at 3 in the morning listening to footsteps pace the hallway outside, I understood something fundamental about human beings that I wish I had never had to learn. You do not know people. You think you do. You look at someone and you build a picture of them from all the little pieces they show you, and your brain fills in the rest with assumptions, with projections, with the comfortable belief that the world makes sense. But there are people walking around out there who are wearing faces like masks, and under those masks is something you are completely unprepared for. My name does not matter. What matters is that 4 or 5 years ago, my girlfriend Sarah and I were burning out. That is the only way to describe it. We were both exhausted from the relentless grind of everyday life, and we had gotten to that place in a relationship where the stress of the outside world starts to leak in through the cracks. Sarah was the one who suggested the cabin trip. She had been reading about these rental properties out in the mountains. Real old-school cabins with stone fireplaces and wood panel walls and that kind of heavy, settling silence you just cannot find anywhere near a city. She thought it would be exactly what we needed. A few days completely unplugged from everything. Just the two of us, the cold air, a good fire, and nothing pressing down on us from any direction. I loved the idea immediately. There was only one problem: money. We were not in a great place financially at that moment, and the cabin she had found was just slightly out of reach for what we could realistically spend. That is when she suggested bringing my best friend Marcus and his girlfriend along to split the cost. Marcus and I had been close since we were teenagers. I trusted him completely. His girlfriend at the time, a woman named Dana, was someone we both liked and got along with well. Sarah reasoned that it would still feel like a retreat because we were all comfortable with each other, and splitting the cost 4 ways would make the whole thing financially manageable. I agreed, and Marcus jumped at the idea without a moment of hesitation. We booked the cabin for the end of that month and spent the next few weeks planning meals and activities and generally getting excited about it the way you do when you have been desperate for a break, and suddenly one appears on the horizon. We were going in the dead of winter, so we wanted all the cozy things. Good food, board games, long nights by the fireplace. It was going to be perfect. Then, about a week before the trip, Marcus and Dana broke up. It came out of nowhere, or at least that is how it seemed from the outside. Marcus was wrecked about it. I called him the same day I heard the news, partly to check on him, and partly because Sarah and I were genuinely unsure what to do about the trip. We had already paid for everything. Pulling Marcus's portion back felt wrong, but making him pay for a trip his girlfriend was supposed to be on also felt wrong. When I brought it up carefully, he told me not to worry about it. He was adamant. He said we should go, that he was fine, and that he was not going to let what happened ruin a trip we had all been looking forward to. I offered to give him his money back at least 3 separate times in that conversation, and he refused every single one. The next afternoon, he called me back and told me he had found someone new to come on the trip. He had been talking to a woman for a short while. He said her name was Kara. He wanted to bring her along. And I want to be clear about how I reacted to this, because I think it matters. I told him I was not comfortable with it. Not because of anything specific, not because I had any bad feeling about this person in particular, but because travel compatibility is its own thing entirely. You can enjoy someone's company in normal circumstances and be an absolute disaster to travel with. Add to that the fact that Kara was someone Marcus had only recently started talking to, someone Sarah and I had never even heard of, and you had a recipe for potential awkwardness on a trip that was supposed to be relaxing. I explained all of this to Marcus. He listened, and then he began to talk me into it the way only your oldest friend knows how to do. He offered to cover my portion of the entire trip if I agreed. He promised me that Kara was easygoing and quiet, and that I would love her. He said we should give her a chance. Sarah was less convinced than I was, but eventually we both agreed. We were going to make the best of it. The weekend arrived, and the 4 of us loaded into my truck for the drive up to the mountains. Marcus introduced me and Sarah to Kara for the first time in the parking lot of our building before we left. She was small, with dark hair and pale skin, and she smiled when we were introduced in this very particular way. Not a wide, open smile, a slow, measured one, like she had learned the motion of smiling from watching other people do it. She seemed shy. That was the first word that came to mind. Maybe a little nervous about meeting her boyfriend's friends for the first time. Perfectly understandable. We were not exactly low-key people. Sarah and I tend to be loud and comfortable and opinionated, and not everyone can keep up with that energy. I figured Kara just needed a little time to warm up. During the entire 2-hour drive, she said almost nothing. I am not exaggerating. I could count on one hand the number of sentences she contributed to the conversation. Every time Sarah or I tried to draw her out, to ask about her life, or her interests, or her work, she gave these short, polite responses and then went quiet again. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, I still genuinely did not know what her voice fully sounded like. But I told myself it was fine. Some people are introverts. Some people take time. That was not a red flag. That was just a person being reserved. The cabin itself was everything we had hoped for. Dark wooden walls, a massive stone fireplace in the main room, rugs on the floors, old furniture that looked like it had absorbed decades of warmth. It felt safe and heavy and settled in the best possible way. We got our bags inside, picked our rooms, and gathered around the fireplace while the heat built up and the cold outside pressed against the windows. For a little while, everything was genuinely nice. We were telling stories and laughing, and even Kara seemed to relax a degree or two, unfolding from herself just slightly, letting a few more words out into the room. Sarah suggested we play cards. Specifically, she suggested Uno. It is her favorite game. Simple, loud, satisfying. I have played hundreds of games of Uno with Sarah over the years, and it has always been one of those things that just brings a lightness to a room. Everyone agreed. Even Kara seemed interested. Marcus got out the cards and dealt, and we were off. The game was going fine. More than fine, actually. Kara was participating, making a few jokes, responding to the energy of the room. I was actually starting to feel good about the whole situation. I thought maybe I had been too hasty in my skepticism. Then Sarah called Uno. For anyone who does not know the game, calling Uno simply means you are announcing that you have only one card left in your hand. It is a standard part of the game. It is not aggressive. It is not suspicious. It is just what you say. Sarah said it and put her second-to-last card down on the pile, and Kara's entire demeanor shifted in the span of about 1 second. At first, we all thought she was joking. She said something like, "There's no way you only have one card," with this tight little smile that looked like the beginning of a laugh. So we laughed a little, thinking she was playing along. But she was not laughing. The smile disappeared, and her voice rose sharply, and suddenly she was telling Sarah that she had been cheating. that there was absolutely no way her hand had gone down that fast, that something was wrong. Her voice had gone from a quiet murmur to something hard and ugly and loud in the span of about 30 seconds. Sarah started to defend herself, confused and caught off guard, and that seemed to make it worse. Kara got louder. She was genuinely yelling. Not just frustrated, not just competitive, but full-throated, shaking, furious. Over a card game, with people she had known for a matter of hours. Marcus reached over and touched her arm and said her name, and she whipped around, and threw her entire hand of cards across the room and stormed out. We sat there in complete silence for what felt like a very long time. Marcus apologized. He looked embarrassed in that deep, total way where you can see it in someone's whole body, not just their face. We told him it was fine and tried to make light of it, because that is what you do when something genuinely unsettling happens, and you do not yet have the information to understand how unsettling it actually is. We laughed it off. We cleaned up the cards. We told ourselves she was just tired from the drive, or stressed about something, or that the competitive energy of the game had gotten to her in a way she was not expecting. People overreact sometimes. It happens. We filed it under awkward and moved on. That evening, Sarah made dinner for all four of us, and Kara came back out from the bedroom looking completely normal. That was unsettling in its own way. Not upset, not embarrassed, not doing any of the things a person typically does after losing their composure in front of strangers. Just back at the table, eating, passing dishes around like the previous hour. Had not happened at all. We all followed her lead and did not bring it up. The meal was pleasant enough. And then, gradually, the conversation shifted somewhere it should not have gone. Kara started to talk about her and Marcus. Specifically, she started to describe details of their physical relationship. Intimate, private details that you simply do not share at a dinner table with people you have just met. I watched Marcus's face go scarlet. I tried to pivot the conversation every time she opened another door into territory that none of us wanted to walk through, making jokes, asking loud questions about something completely unrelated, but she kept pulling it back. It went on for several minutes. When it finally stopped, the four of us sat in a kind of hollow silence, and not long after that, without much discussion, we all said goodnight and went to our respective rooms. That night, around 2 a.m, I felt Sarah, shaking me awake. She pressed her finger to her lips and pointed toward the wall. I sat up and listened. From the other end of the cabin, I could hear voices. Marcus and Kara were arguing. I could not make out the specific words, but the tone was unmistakable. The rise and fall of it, the sharp edges in the sound. They were fighting, and it was not quiet. Sarah and I lay there in the dark, neither of us speaking, until eventually the voices faded. We did not sleep much after that. In the morning, we made the unspoken agreement that we would not mention it. We did not want to embarrass Marcus any more than he already clearly was. The following day was quiet. Uneventful in a way that felt almost deliberate, like everyone in that cabin was breathing carefully and choosing their steps. Marcus was subdued, barely present. Kara was polite but distant. Sarah and I did our best to act like everything was fine. The hours passed slowly. The temperature outside dropped even further, and the forest around the cabin got dark early, and in that particular winter darkness you could not see anything beyond the tree line, just black. That night, I do not know what time it was exactly. I woke up to a presence in the room. My eyes opened and there was a figure standing next to the bed. It took me 2 full seconds to understand that I was not dreaming. And in those 2 seconds, my body produced a kind of cold terror I had genuinely never felt before. It was Marcus. He was standing over me in the dark with this expression on his face that I have never seen before or since on any person. It was pure, undiluted fear. Not the startled fear of a jump scare. The deep, settled fear of someone who has had time to understand that something is very wrong. I whispered to him, asking what was happening, asking if he was okay. He looked at me and then looked at the bedroom door and then back at me and asked in this barely there voice if he could stay in our room tonight and if we could lock the door. I told him to come in, turned on the lamp, and sat up. Sarah woke up and the three of us sat together on the bed while Marcus told us what had happened. He said he had been asleep, and something had brought him up out of sleep. He did not know what. He just opened his eyes and was awake, and when he looked toward the foot of the bed, Kara was standing there. Just standing. Not sitting on the edge of the mattress, not moving, not doing anything. Standing at the foot of the bed, staring at him in the dark. He said he had asked her what she was doing, and there had been a pause, a long pause, and then she had said in this utterly flat voice that she was watching him sleep, just in case. He asked just in case of what, and she did not answer. She just turned and walked out of the room without another word. He had lain there for a few minutes trying to decide what to do. Then he decided to get up and check on her. He said he did not know why he made that choice. Some part of him felt responsible. Felt like maybe she was sleepwalking or having some kind of episode and he needed to make sure she was safe. He walked out into the dark hallway, and that is when he saw her side of the bed. He had moved her pillow to grab an extra blanket and something had shifted under the covers. He pulled the blanket back and there on her side of the bed, resting, on the mattress was a large kitchen knife. He stood there looking at that knife for what he described as a very long moment. Then he pulled the blanket back over it, left the room, and walked through the dark cabin to get to us. He said he had heard her before he saw her. A low, tuneless humming coming from the direction of the main room. When he got to the entrance of the hallway, she was in the living room, and he described what she was doing as something between wandering and dancing. Moving in slow circles through the dark, humming to herself, arms slightly out. Like she was in her own world entirely. He said it was worse than sleepwalking. It had a quality to it, an intentionality that did not look like an unconscious mind doing things on autopilot. He had tried to get past her to our bedroom without making noise, but the old floorboards creaked under his foot, and she had stopped humming immediately. Not slowed down, stopped. He froze. She had turned in his direction, and he said she did not look like she was focusing on him exactly. More like she was looking at where he was without fully processing him. And then she had said, in a voice he described as sing-song and completely wrong, "I see you." Then she had turned back and continued humming and circling the room. He had gotten to us as fast as he could without making any more noise. The three of us sat together in that locked room while Sarah and I tried to process everything. I kept coming back to the knife. The knife was the thing that would not let me explain the rest of it away. A person can sleepwalk. A person can behave strangely under stress. A person can have a breakdown at a card game and overreact and come out of it and seem fine. All of those things are frightening in their own right, but they exist in a category that still makes a kind of sense to me. The knife lying in the bed does not live in that category. We could still hear her. The humming carried down the hall, sometimes louder and sometimes softer as she moved through the cabin. We sat with that sound surrounding us in the dark, and none of us said much. Then we heard the front door open, and then close. Sarah got up and pulled on her coat and said she was going outside to get her. She said we could not leave someone out there in freezing temperatures in the middle of the night, not knowing if she was in some kind of dissociated state, not knowing if she even knew where she was. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm and begged her not to go. I have never seen Marcus beg in my life. I have known him since we were 12 years old, and I watched him beg Sarah not to open that door, and it frightened me more than almost anything else from that night. We stood there, the three of us, suspended in that terrible decision, and then we heard the door again. It opened and it closed, and then footsteps in the hall, and then silence, and then the low sound of humming beginning again from somewhere inside the cabin. None of us slept. We sat together in that locked room until the light outside shifted from black to gray to the thin, pale blue of winter morning. At 6 o'clock, we heard movement in the kitchen. We opened the door and walked out to find Kara washing dishes. She turned around when she heard us and smiled. Not the slow, learned smile from before. A normal smile. A warm one, even. She said good morning. She asked if anyone wanted coffee. She acted with total, complete, seamless normalcy, like she had slept 10 hours and felt wonderful, and the previous night had simply never happened. We drove home that morning. We loaded the bags into the truck and drove home mostly in silence. Kara's bag sat in the back seat between her and Marcus, and I knew exactly what was inside it, and I watched the highway lines disappear under the front of the truck, and I counted them and breathed and did not say a word. Marcus stopped speaking to Kara the moment we got back. Completely, immediately gone. No confrontation, no conversation, just silence. She never reached out to him, not once. Like she knew the arrangement had ended and she had simply moved on to whatever came next. Sarah started trying to find her. Online a while after that. Social media, search engines, public records, nothing. There was no trace of any woman by the name of Kara matching her description anywhere that Sarah could find. She checked inmate records just to cover every possibility. Still nothing. It was as though the woman did not exist, which means almost certainly she had given us a name that was not her own. And if that was true, then the question I come back to over and over is the one I cannot answer. What did she want? She was in that cabin with us for almost 2 days. She had a knife on her side of the bed. She walked through the dark at 3 a.m, humming to herself, and went out into the freezing forest. She knew we were afraid, and she did nothing, which means either something stopped her, or she got what she came for. And I do not know which of those possibilities frightens me more. I am going to tell you something about myself before I tell you this next story, because I think it matters. I know what it is to be genuinely alone. Not lonely, not isolated in the way people mean when they say they just need some space. I mean really, completely, preferring it that way alone. For a stretch of a few years, my anxiety around other people had gotten to a point that even ordinary interactions felt like a physical weight. The sound of conversation in the next room, the obligation of small talk, the constant low-level performance of being a person among other people, all of it exhausted me in a way that sleep did not fix. I dealt with this by disappearing. Every weekend when I had enough money, I would find a cabin or a secluded rental property somewhere outside the city, and I would go there alone. I would hike. I would read. I would sit and watch the light change and feel the pressure lift off me, and by Sunday evening I would feel like a version of myself that I actually recognized. It sounds extreme to most people. I understood that even at the time. But the relief was so total and so necessary that I kept doing it for almost 2 years. I want to be clear about something. I was not naive about the risks of being alone and isolated. I did not wander into the wilderness without precautions. I always told someone where I was going. I always had a fully charged phone and a backup battery. I was careful. I thought that being careful was enough. It was a Friday evening when I arrived at the cabin for what was supposed to be a standard weekend. 2 hours from home, no neighbors. Within half a mile, a driveway through the trees that took you so far from the main road that by the time the cabin came into view, you felt genuinely removed from everything. Which was exactly the point. I had rented the place once before and remembered it as quiet and clean and exactly what I needed. I made dinner, sat with a book, and turned in early. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt different. It was just a night. Saturday morning, I went hiking. The trail behind the cabin cut through about 3 miles of dense forest before looping back, and I had done it before and liked it for the way it required enough physical attention to quiet the noise in my head. The cold that morning was dry and sharp, and the bare trees stood absolutely still against a pale sky. For the first hour, I felt exactly the way I came out there to feel. Present. Quiet. Like myself. And then I became aware of a sound behind me. Branches. The particular sharp snap of a branch underfoot. Once would have been nothing. Animals move through forests. Wind moves through forests. A single snapping branch in the middle of the woods means nothing. But it kept happening. At a pace and a rhythm that had a quality to it I cannot fully describe, except to say that it did not feel random. It felt like something that was keeping its distance but keeping pace. I turned around 3 times in the span of about 20 minutes and saw nothing. The forest behind me was empty as far as I could see in every direction. No movement, no shape, nothing. My mind, as I said, tends toward anxiety. I know this about myself. I know that my first instinct is always the alarming one, that I read danger into things before I give them the chance to be innocent. So I kept hiking. I told myself it was animals. I told myself the acoustics of a forest do strange things with sound. I hiked on, but the feeling grew and grew and the sounds continued, and eventually I reached a point where I was not enjoying being outside at all. The thing I went out there for, the peace, the presence, the quiet inside my own head, was completely gone, and in its place was something coiled and tight. I turned around and walked back to the cabin faster than I should have needed to. That afternoon I drank more than I intended to. The anxiety from the hike would not settle, and at some point I made the decision that loosening it with alcohol was a reasonable approach. By 11 o'clock that night I was not drunk exactly, but I was soft around the edges, and the music I had put on was loud enough that I almost did not hear the knocking. It was subtle at first, the kind of sound that your brain files under background noise until it repeats and repeats and suddenly your attention locks onto it. I turned the music off. Silence. Then it came again. A knock at the front door. The door was solid wood with 2 tall rectangular windows set into it, one on each side. I crossed the room and looked through the glass and saw nothing. The porch was empty. I told myself it was the wind, or a branch, or some animal brushing against the door, and I walked back toward the couch. Before I sat down, the knock came again. Harder this time. I went back to the door and looked out, and this time there was someone standing there. He was standing just far enough back that the porch light had not caught him yet. A dark shape in the dark. I turned on the exterior light and looked. He was a tall man, fit, straight-shouldered, clean. He was wearing a suit, not an outdoor jacket over dress clothes, not layers against the cold. A suit. Dark jacket, dark trousers, white shirt. The kind of outfit you wear to a meeting or a dinner or a professional event. Not the kind of outfit you wear to walk through a forest at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night in the middle of winter. His hair was dark and swept back neatly from his face, and he was clean-shaven, and he stood on my porch looking completely composed. Not cold, not distressed, not out of breath. Just standing there. I did not open the door. I spoke through it. I asked if he was okay and what he needed. He did not answer immediately. There was a pause of several seconds before any response came. And I want to try to explain what that pause felt like, because I think it was the first thing that made me genuinely afraid, even before the words came. It was not the pause of someone gathering their thoughts or catching their breath. It was the pause of something processing, like a delay between input and output that was just slightly longer than it should have been for a normal human conversation. Then he spoke in a voice that was completely level and said he had been driving with his girlfriend and she was gone, and he had been walking for hours, and he was lost and needed to come inside to call someone for help. I want to pull that statement apart for a moment, because every time I have thought about it since, I notice something wrong. He did not say his girlfriend was missing. He did not say they had an accident or she had gotten out of the car or any of the dozen things a person in that situation would naturally explain. He said she was gone, like a fact, like something he was reporting rather than experiencing. And his voice had no distress in it. None. He was telling me this story in the same tone you might use to read items off a grocery list. There was no fear, no urgency, no grief, no desperation, just the flat transmission of information. I told him I would call someone for help, but that he needed to back away from the door and wait at the end of the driveway. He paused again. Then he said he needed to come inside. He said there was something out there, and he needed to get inside where it was safe or he was going to be in trouble. Something out there. He gestured vaguely behind himself, but did not look in that direction. When someone is genuinely afraid of something behind them, they tend to look at it or look away from it in a way that registers the direction as real and present. He gestured without looking, like he had been told to mention it. I told him very clearly that I was calling the police and that he could wait outside or leave, but I was not opening the door. I walked away from the door to get my phone off the table. And from behind the door I heard him say, quietly and without inflection, that he wanted to hide inside the cabin. He said he needed to hide. He said it with the same emotional flatness as everything else. Then he started pounding on the door. It was not frantic, it was rhythmic, heavy, like he was knocking to a beat rather than desperate to get inside. I ran back to the door and started yelling through it, things I'm not proud of, things designed to communicate that I was not afraid and he should leave. And in the middle of my shouting, I heard something that made me go completely still. He was laughing, not nervously, not in surprise at being yelled at. A real laugh, warm almost, like something had just amused him. I looked out the glass panel in the door and his face was right there. He had closed the distance to the door and pressed himself right up against the glass so that his face was no more than a few inches from mine with only that pane of window between us. I recoiled. My legs went weak and I actually stumbled. And then, in a completely calm and almost friendly voice, he said, "Come on." He used my name, my actual name. He said it like he was tired of waiting, like this was an inconvenience. He said, "Come on, just open the door." I could not process how he knew my name. I still cannot. There is no reasonable explanation I have ever landed on that satisfies me. I had never seen this man before in my life. My name was not on any external signage or mailbox at the property. The booking was under a username, not my full name. He should not have been able to know who I was. And he said it like he had always known. I dialed emergency services while I was still standing by the door. I told them where I was and that someone was trying to force entry. I gave them the address. When I looked out the window after hanging up, the porch was empty. The man was gone. The forest edge beyond the driveway was dark and absolutely still. I stood at that window for 15 minutes watching the darkness and seeing nothing move. One patrol car arrived. The officer was young and competent, and when I told him everything, including the name, I watched his face do something careful and controlled that told me he was taking it seriously, even as he tried not to alarm me. He walked the perimeter of the property and found nothing. No footprints that were clearly distinct from the surrounding ground. No sign of anyone having been there. He came back inside and suggested that if I felt unsafe, I should not stay at the cabin alone. I told him I had been drinking and was not able to drive. He offered to take me into town himself. We walked out to his patrol car together, and that is when he stopped and made a sharp, surprised sound. I followed his gaze to my car. All 4 tires were flat. Not one. All 4. Slashed, he said, with something sharp, likely a knife, in the amount of time between when I called him and when he arrived, while I was watching the front of the cabin. Through the door windows, someone had been at my car. He drove me to a motel in town. He sat with me in the lobby while I called my father, and he did not leave until I had a key card in my hand and was walking toward the elevator. I am grateful for that. I do not know what I would have done if he had left me in the parking lot. I never went back to the cabin. I never filed any additional reports because I had nothing additional to report. A man in a suit appeared at my door in the woods, knew my name, and disappeared. My tires were slashed while I was distracted, and somewhere in those trees, whatever he had come there for, whatever he had wanted from me that night, he simply moved on. And I have spent years since asking myself whether the thing I got away from was a person at all, or something that was only using that shape. The last thing I want to tell you tonight is different from the others. It does not involve strangers. It involves the dead, or more precisely, it involves the space a dead person leaves behind and what moves into that space when no one is watching. My father and I were never close. This is a plain fact, and I am not looking for sympathy around it. He was not a cruel man. He was not someone who was deliberately difficult or abusive. He was simply a man who had a very specific picture of who his child should be. And I was not that person from the very beginning. I could see it in his face when I was young, this subtle, persistent disappointment. The way you look at something that was supposed to be one thing and turned out to be another. We managed it over the years by staying mostly at a distance. Polite calls, infrequent visits, careful, shallow conversations about neutral subjects. When he died, I was not devastated in the way some people are. I grieved the relationship we never had, which is a different and in some ways more complex kind of grief. I went through his affairs with the flat efficiency of someone handling a practical matter and tried not to feel too much about any of it. And then his will was read, and I found out he had left me his cabin. He had owned the cabin since before I was born. It was the one place he truly loved, the one context in which I ever saw him fully at ease. The mountains, the forest, the quiet. It suited him in a way that our relationship never did. My friends joked that leaving it to me was his final joke, his way of burdening me one last time with something I would not know what to do with. I disagreed. I think he knew I would sell it, and I think he wanted me to. I think it was, in way, a gift. The paperwork for selling it required the property to be cleaned out and assessed. There were minor repairs to note, and the place needed to be presentable. I decided to go up alone and handle it. It felt like something I needed to do for my own reasons, a way of ending the story properly, of saying goodbye to a man I had found so difficult to be close to in a place that had been truly his. I arrived at the cabin on a Tuesday afternoon and knew immediately that something was wrong. The smell hit me the moment I opened the door. It was dense and layered and specific in a way that made me stop on the threshold. Death is the word that came to mind, but it was not quite that. It was closer to the smell of something long unwashed and confined, of old food and human habitation in a space that had not been aired or cleaned in a very long time. I knew that my father had not visited the cabin in close to a year before he died, so I told myself it was just the smell of a closed space, of age and dust and neglect. I opened every window I could and went to work. The downstairs was substantial, in its neglect, but nothing I could not handle. I spent several hours cleaning and cataloging, working through the rooms systematically. It looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood. Same furniture, same arrangement, same photographs and books on the same shelves. It was like being inside a memory. I found that more affecting than I had expected. At some point in the afternoon, I noticed a sound above me, rustling, movement, subtle and irregular but consistent. I stood still and listened, and it came again. This soft shifting sound from somewhere over the ceiling. I remembered then that the cabin had an attic space, though calling it an attic was generous. It was more of a crawl space with ambitions, accessible through a panel in the back hallway ceiling that pulled down on a cord and unfolded a short ladder. My father used it for storage. I assumed the sound was an animal. Squirrels in the rafters, or mice, or something else that had found. A way in while the cabin sat empty. I noted it on my list and moved on. By evening I was tired and the smell had faded enough to be livable. I decided to leave the attic for tomorrow. I made a simple meal, ate alone in the kitchen, and went to bed in my father's room with clean sheets I had brought from home, and the window cracked just slightly against the residual smell. I woke in the dark, and the first thing I registered was the sound, rustling, louder than before, or maybe it only seemed louder in the complete silence of a mountain night. It was definitely above me, directly above me, moving slowly in a way that had a pace to it, deliberate, purposeful. My animal theory reasserted itself, and I decided to go and check rather than lie there listening. I got up and walked to the back hallway. The attic panel was open. The ladder was hanging down. I was fairly sure I had not opened it. I stopped and looked at it and tried to remember with certainty whether I had gone up there after all, whether it was possible I had forgotten. I did not think so. But the alternative required a different kind of thinking that I was not yet ready to do. I decided I must have half opened it without thinking and not latched it properly, and that the motion of the house, temperature changes, contracting and expanding the frame, had finished the job. That was possible. That was a reasonable thing to believe. Then I looked at the floor at the base of the ladder. There was a food wrapper on the floor, a small, crinkled wrapper from a snack bar. I stared at it for a long moment. I had cleaned the entire downstairs earlier. I had swept and mopped and wiped down every surface. There had been no wrapper in this hallway when I went to bed. I was absolutely certain of that. In a way, I was not certain about the latter. I picked up the wrapper and carried it to the kitchen trash and stood at the sink and looked at my own reflection in the dark window over the sink and thought about the sound above me. Then I thought about the smell. I thought about how thick and specific it had been when I first arrived. Not just old house smell, not just dust, the particular density of a space that had been occupied by something for a long time. I thought about the wrappers in the attic. I had noticed them when I briefly went up that afternoon, scattered among the boxes, and assumed my father had been messier up there than I had known. I had thought that. I had told myself that. I stood at the sink and very carefully, piece by piece, I revised my understanding. I went to the living room. I did not turn on a main light. I turned on a small lamp near the couch that gave off a low, orange, insufficient glow. I sat on the couch because I needed to sit, and I needed to think, and I needed to be somewhere that I could see the whole room. I sat, and I looked around and I thought about my father spending the last year of his life too sick to travel, to come up here, to check on this place that he loved. I thought about what a year of vacancy looked like. From the outside, no cars in the driveway, no lights, no movement. A structure sitting empty and dark at the end of a long private road that you would have to be specifically looking for to find. I looked across the living room, in the corner near the recliner, where I was certain I had cleaned and cleared. There was something on the floor, a shape under a dark blanket. My first thought was that I had simply missed it, a pile of things my tired brain had not registered. It happens. You look at something and your mind files it and moves on. I sat there telling myself that and looking at the shape, and then the shape moved, not dramatically, not suddenly. It shifted. A slow, quiet repositioning of weight, the way a person moves when they have been in the same position for a long time and they are making a small adjustment, the way a person breathes. The blanket rose and fell in a rhythm. I stopped thinking. Thinking, I want to be clear about this, was no longer a tool that was available to me in that moment. I existed in the purest available form of animal awareness. I was watching the blanket. I watched it shift again. I saw, protruding from the edge of the blanket near the floor, the toe of a boot. I backed up. 1 step, 2 steps, into the hallway, into the kitchen. I picked up my phone and my keys from the counter in one motion, and I went out the back door at something close to a sprint. I got into my car and started it and backed down the long driveway as fast as I could manage. At the point where the driveway met the road, I looked in the rearview mirror. There was a man standing outside the cabin door. He must have heard me leave or the car starting, because he was outside and he was watching me back out. He was standing in the weak porch light, and I could see him clearly enough. Thin, unkempt, long matted hair. The kind of person you would describe with the word feral and mean it. He did not chase the car. He did not run toward me or shout or make any aggressive motion. He just stood there and watched me go. I drove to a gas station 2 miles down the road and called the police. The officer who took my report was thoughtful and not unkind. He explained what he believed had happened. My father had not been to the cabin in close to a year. At some point during that vacancy, someone had found the property, found it empty, and moved in. A person looking for shelter, somewhere to be, out of the elements, and when no one ever came to disturb them, they had simply stayed. The attic provided concealment. The main rooms of the cabin were available whenever the cabin was otherwise empty. The smell, the wrappers, the food debris I had assumed was my father's untidiness. All of it had a different explanation now. The officer estimated, based on the smell and the condition of the space, that the person had been living there for something close to a year. Almost the entire period since my father had last visited. He had been there while I arrived, while I cleaned, while I ate, and went to sleep, and lay awake listening to him move above me. He had come down from the attic at some point in the night and opened the panel and descended the ladder and dropped a wrapper and covered himself with a blanket in the corner of
the living room.
While I had sat in that room in the low orange light thinking about my father and feeling things I had not expected to feel, there had been a man 6 feet away from me under a blanket, completely still, listening to me breathe. When the police got to the cabin, he was gone. No trace beyond what was already there. No name, no record, no information of any kind. He had vanished back into wherever the fringes led. I do not believe he intended to hurt me, unless he had to. He had so many opportunities and took none of them. But the fact of what he was, a stranger living inside my father's space, inside the space that was supposed to hold my memory of him, a secret presence in a place that should have been only grief and quiet and letting go. That is something I have never been fully able to set down. I hired a company to clean the cabin out and never set foot in it again. I sold it exactly as it was. I did not tell the cleaning crew what they would find up there. Maybe that makes me a bad person. I cannot say. I only know that some spaces stop belonging to you and you have to let them go and walk away and try to leave what happened inside them where it lives, rather than carrying it forward into the rest of your life. The problem is that some things follow you, and that is the true lesson of all three of these stories. The thing they share beneath the surface details. It is not the knife in the bed or the man in the suit who knew my name or the stranger breathing in the corner under a blanket. It is the understanding that safety is a story we tell ourselves, and like all stories, it is only as solid as our willingness to keep believing it. The cabins in these stories were all supposed to be the same thing: an escape, a refuge, a place to retreat to when the rest of life becomes too heavy. And in every single case, the thing waiting inside that refuge was something that the people who went there had no framework for, no preparation, no warning. Because the warning never comes. The darkness does not announce itself. It is already inside when you arrive. It was there before you pulled up the driveway. It was there while you unpacked your bags and lit the fire, and told yourself that out here, finally, you could breathe. So breathe carefully. Check what is under the blanket. Listen to what is moving above the ceiling. And the next time someone knocks on your door in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, wearing a suit and knowing your name and asking to come inside, do what I wish I could go back and do from the very beginning of that night. Do not open the door. Do not turn on the light. Do not let them know you are home. Just sit in the dark, very still, and wait until morning, if morning comes.